Hello, and welcome to the eighth part of the Flowacademy series. And in this episode, I have decided to shift gears here a little because in the last episode, I did mention that we're going to cover the setup needed for the main part of the dashboard, which is setting up the ongoing courses, setting up bookmarked courses, and setting up the courses that we have completed. However, what I didn't realize is that before you can set this up, it's very important. So if I click into all courses here first, and wait for this to load up. So it's very important. And this is something that I think I did mention previously a couple of times that when the user clicks on to any course, let's say this course, as you can see that it says play, which means that the user hasn't enrolled into this course. Now, it's very important to understand how we are enrolling this user onto a course that they haven't enrolled into. So as you can see, I haven't enrolled into this course. So as soon as I click on play, this is going to redirect me to that course page, and then we can start playing this episode. And now, technically, we are enrolled into this episode. So let's go back into our dashboard here and wait for this to load up. So as you can see, we have our card here, our course, which we are enrolled into. So, which brings me back to my main point. So, in this episode, we're going to learn how to enroll the user into our course, and we're going to be learning how to set up our course page, which is this page right here. Once we learn how to do that, we will know how to work with ongoing courses and bookmarked courses and certifications as well. So that is that. And another thing that I have decided to do is jumping back over to Wized, I went ahead and I have set up all the actions and all the requests and basically wrapped up on building out the entire demo application. Here's the thing. The reason why I did that is because this is quite a big application. As I was recording this, I realized it's just a lot more feasible to sort of do this off recording, and I've decided to just instead of doing setting up all my actions and requests on the recording, I just decided to walk through it. I think it would be a lot easier and faster. And of course, if you have any queries, the comments are always open. Feel free to ask me anything, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. So that being said, now let's move on to our setup. And first on the agenda, we have is to walk through our Webflow build. For on Webflow, I am in our course page. So just to clarify, it's this course page, which is nested in our dashboard folder. So let's look into this. So firstly, we are greeted with our skeleton loader. This is something that we've already covered on the previous episodes. The setup is exactly the same. And if you remember correctly, all these div blocks have this class right here, skeleton object. So yeah, and if we add different variation of styling, we add combo class on top of it. So that's what var 7 and var 8 is. These are just different variations of styling, but we're all always targeting skeleton objects. So if I open up global styles here, just to point out where we have our skeleton loader CSS, you'll find it right here. Oh, I mean right here. This is the one. So that is the skeleton loader CSS. And if you remember correctly, we also have a JS that we apply on Wized, so that we can create a waterfall sort of animation effect. So yeah, that's that for the skeleton loader. Let's hop over onto the next thing, and we have our breadcrumb right here. Pretty standard stuff. This is a link that takes us to the link page, which takes us to, the dashboard home page. And then we have our course name that will be printed here. So that's that over here. And then this div block, which is the interesting one. So if you look at the navigator panel here, we have our video container, and inside that we have a custom DOM element. And if I click into this custom DOM element with the settings panel selected, you'll notice that there are a few attributes attached to this. We have the attribute of ID player attached to this. Well, then we have a plays inline, which is set to true. And then we have a Wized attribute on top of this called video player. Now, before I dive into the details for this, let me just head over to this website here. So this is called playr. Okay, so this is the custom video player that we're using for our demo LMS system here. You can integrate YouTube, you can integrate Vimeo, and just any HTML5 video and audio as well. So that's what we're using. You can check out the documentation on their site if you want to. That being said, just to install this video player, this is actually quite easy. So you just need these attributes. Obviously, you need the Wized attribute so that we can target this element over onto Wized. But other than that, obviously, you need to provide the ID. So we also have the JavaScript code for this so that the JavaScript code knows that, hey, this element right here is the one that happens to be the video player. And then we have plays inline true. This attribute right here is just to ensure that our video does not play on full screen mode by default. So it also indicates that it just should play in the confinement of this div block right here within the video container. So that's where the video player should be restricted to, unless the user clicks on the full screen mode. That's what our plays inline uh, attribute is for. So we've set this to true. We also have two more attributes that we're going to apply, but we're going to cover that on Wized. So it's not right here. Now, with the video player, while we're still talking about the video player, if I head over to our page settings, obviously we have JavaScript code that we need to apply. So it's this one right here, initialize player library. So we already have this code right here, so that this is the code that is responsible for initializing our player code. We're going to cover these two in just a bit, and then we have another one right here. Load the CSS file for player via JS. Now we already have a CSS file for this, um, but the thing is, I'm using my own CSS file as opposed to the CSS file provided by Player because I just wanted to apply my color of branding on top of it. And because they provide their CSS file publicly, I just dropped it into Codesandbox. So what I've done is I have Codesandbox right here, and I've created a CSS file for player. So let me just show you. So, okay, so we are currently on player CSS. And basically, what I did is I've just selected the main CSS just to apply my branding of colors. So, what I mean by that is if I head over to the actual demo, and let's just say, let's resume to this code course right here. So, as you can see, this play button matches the color of this branding right here. So, changing colors and then changing all the colors essentially. That's what I've done. It was proving to be a little difficult overriding it initially. So I thought, hey, you know what? They provide their CSS, so why not just copy their CSS and drop it into Code Sandbox? So yeah, and then we have the hover states and everything, the text color change. So all the stuff that you can think of and you can see here, I've adjusted that in the CSS file. Now, another thing to point out, and for those of you who are not familiar with Code Sandbox, Code Sandbox is a great way to basically store your JavaScript code and CSS code, and then be able to link them into Webflow. And for those of you wondering why would anyone do that, it's because when you apply any changes and then you save that code, that change gets reflected onto Webflow immediately. So you don't have to, as opposed to having your code directly on Webflow, every time you want to change something to your code, you would have to come here, apply that change, and then publish the page. And it takes a while. So rather than doing that, Code Sandbox is basically a server where you just drop your JavaScript code or CSS code in there and it works like magic. You apply any change, save it, and it's done. Also, another thing to point out is let me just head over to the main dashboard. At the time of making this, Code Sandbox does not offer creating a sandbox for free like how they used to. So you can create a sandbox for free to have your code stored into a server. But the problem is, it's not public, and if it's not public, you won't be able to have that functioning in your Webflow website. So what as a workaround, what you can do is create a dev box. So once you click on create a dev box, just go with the React. It doesn't matter what language you go for here. I just went for React here. Once you go in for React, make sure you create your dev box, because once your project is created and everything is created, all you really need is to just create the pages and just drop your code in and then be able to link your code. So as you can see, I have my player code right here. So all I need to do is copy this code right here, sorry, the address for this dev box, and basically link it over here. And then to make sure that I'm selecting the right file, I need to put in player CSS. So hopefully all that jargon makes sense. Now you might be wondering, why am I not connecting my style sheet on the head tag here, and why am I doing it through body in the body through JavaScript nonetheless? Um, I don't know why, but I've come across this very interesting bug, and when I did this, it suddenly made Wiz just stopped working. So yeah, so as a workaround, this is what I have come to. And I have also done the same for Quill, which is something we're going to be seeing in just a bit and learning what Quill is all about. So yeah, that's that for the video player. All right, so next on the list we have is this chapters. The chapters are quite easy. This is just a div block. We have all our elements here. We have the play button, we have the chapter name, the chapter duration, and the check icon for the event if the chapter has been completed. So obviously we want to render all the chapters out here. This is something that we're going to be covering in Wized. Also, I wanted to point out is that when you go into tablet, so you can see that the video is right here, and the player, well, actually, the best way to explain this is if you look at the navigator panel here, I have this div block that says hide on tablet dash mobile. So this div block has if I open this up, has the chapter wrapper right here. We also have another div block, which is called show on tablet and mobile. This has the same exact thing as this right here. So this is currently hidden, but this switches on as soon as you head into the tablet mode. The reason why we did it that way is because if you don't, then let's say that this element doesn't exist, then technically, and of course, this depends on your understanding of how grid system work and everything, and how the flexbox works. Sorry, the box model works. So if you go into tablet, then technically your chapter will be right here in the end. But we don't want that. We actually want it before this tab system. We want this right underneath our video player. So to make that happen, we created another div block that also contains our courses chapter. And the course chapter in this div block and this div block have the same Wized attribute. So whenever you make any changes here over on Webflow, make sure you do your due diligence on applying the same changes over to the other element as well. Hopefully that makes sense. And obviously, moving on to this portion over here, this is the overview tab. And, it's just a matter of setting our course name, the tutor name, tutor image, and the course summary. And then we have the chapter name and the chapter summary. So what is this chapter about? What is the summary for this chapter? So this is what this portion is all about. All right, so now let's move over onto our notes here. So let's switch our tab here. Okay, so of course, this might seem a little scary because if you haven't worked with the sort of rich content editor, worry not, the setup is extremely simple. So let's see what we're dealing with here. So firstly, we have our timestamp here. So this is just a simple div block that has a simple text block inside of it. And the idea is that if I jump over onto our, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mute this and head over to notes. So once I start playing this, so basically this is a timestamp. So it basically reflects the timestamp over here. So the current duration, the playback time. Sorry. So once I pause this and when I start putting writing my notes down, we want to make sure that this note also reflects the time that it's related to. So that way, when you're looking back at your note, like, okay, so this note is related to this timestamp right here, which belongs to this chapter right here. So let me just put in something. This is a test. And of course, our rich text editor also gives us the option to be able to switch this over to various headings if we want to. We also have a normal text. We have bold, italics, and then we have numbered list and bullet list as well. So all in all, pretty cool stuff here. Let's put this to H1, create our note, and we'll see that our note is being reflected here. So that is really cool. If you want, you can also edit this. Let's say maybe I don't want an H1 anymore. Select this and convert this to normal and save our note. And there we go. It gets reflected almost immediately. So yeah, that's what our rich text editor looks like. Obviously, we have another rich text editor on this portion as well. We're going to cover that in just a bit. Another neat thing about our rich text container is that let's say that you type something in, but then you decide not to put anything in and you want to create a note out of something that doesn't exist. So we also have a scenario covered for that. So we're going to stop you from being able to do anything. So that is really cool. So if you start typing something, then our error state goes away. We also have something a similar mechanism implemented for editing a note as well. Let's say in the event that you know remove this and you decide to save your note, you can't create an empty note. Actually, the verbiage should be a little different. It should say you can't save an empty note. So that's something that I need to uh, improve on. Well, actually, you know what? We're going to do that right now. So that's what our rich content editor does. And if you're wondering how we're doing this, we're basically making all this possible with Quill.js. This is also another JavaScript library for creating our rich text editor. If this is something that you haven't worked with before, that's absolutely fine because, like I said, the setup is actually quite simple. All right, so we have covered the timestamp reflector, so that which reflects the playback time for the video, and then we have okay. So let me just open this up a little bit so it's a bit clear as to what we're dealing with. So we have this central div block called create node editor wrapper, which is the main wrapper. Inside this, we have our div block that has the options laid out that you see on the actual demo. So we have our HTML embed. Let's open this up. And you'll notice that I have created a custom HTML. And the reason why I did a custom HTML is because generally with select fields and all those sort of options, you need to embed that inside a form. But with Quill, it's a little different. You cannot have a form element inside this div block, which is why I had to use an HTML embed. That being said, you just need to put in all the options that you want to put in there. So that's completely up to you. Um, you do have to put in Quill.js's native classes, or else the Quill JavaScript library is not going to be able to recognize the elements that it needs to target. So it's actively looking out for QL related class names. Then we have other options here, which is the bold, the italic, the list, and you'll notice that when I click on these, they have their own classes. These are classes that has been provided by the Quill library. So they have their entire documentation based on this. Please make sure to check them out before you start implementing these for your application. So this is the QL bold. So apart from this, this is a custom DOM element that I'm using, and I've applied the class name to that. Other than that, I don't think I've applied anything on the settings here. So yeah, it's just the class name and it's an empty div block essentially. The same story for QL italic as well. For QL list, okay, so yeah, we have two QL lists here, but for the first QL list, if I take you to the settings here, we actually have an attribute that's called value ordered. So that's something that you have to put in with yours as well. So this is to imply that this element right here is a ordered list, and this element right here is a bullet list. Now, in case if you're wondering, in the live demo, these icons and these are all supplied by Quill JS. And the styling itself is also done by Quill JS. So if you're not a huge fan of Quill JS's CSS styling and everything, of course you can target its class and then apply your own custom CSS on top of it. All right, so that is the setup for our Quill content editor. So obviously we have the button right here. And if you look at the navigator panel, we also have a form validation wrapper. Again, if you might have noticed that on episode 1, 2, and 3, we've been dealing with these quite a lot. So we have our form error wrapper, which has a combo class of hidden. If I get rid of that, as you can see, that this is the one that shows up for the error state. So let's hide that back. So yeah, that's our central rich text editor, and then we have our the note that we have saved. Again, same elements. We have this button here that when you click on it, basically initializes another form of rich content editor specifically for this note right here. And then we have a delete button for the event that we want to delete this note. Now, these two are something that we're going to be handling over on Wized. This right here is a rich text element because again, we have a rich text, a rich content editor. So it makes sense that our note needs to be reflected through a rich text element. All right. So, and then we have our note edit wrapper, which has a combo class of hidden. So if I reveal this, so you can see that we also have a custom code, which is going to be applied on Wized. So the custom code is smart enough to know that, hey, if I have like 5 or 6 notes, and if I click on a note edit toggle for a specific note, it knows which one to basically um, make active, the rich content editor. So what I mean by that is, let's say I have, okay, let's put normal here. This is a test 2. Let's create a note. Let's create another one. This is a third one here. Let's create a note. So obviously now we have 3 instances present, uh, 3 instances of rich content editor present within each of our notes here. So if I click on the second one, it intelligently knows that it needs to initialize the Quill editor for only the second note. If I do it for the first one, now we have 2. If I have the third one, now we have 3. So yeah, it's very, very flexible. Let's say if I want to cancel that, it cancels only the first one, so it doesn't collide with the other 2. So this took me a while to implement this functionality, but it's pretty neat. Again, something that we're going to be covering inside of Wized. So I'm going to go ahead and apply our combo class back. And that is that for the Quill.js. But before we conclude on that, let's head over to our page settings. And just like our playr JavaScript library, obviously Quill also has its own JavaScript library. You want to make sure that you include that in the body tag. And we also have this other code that says sanitize the HTML content for Quill. Now, this is something that ChatGPT recommended me to do because it's a safe measure. If you have any user with malicious intent, they can write some pretty harmful stuff on the rich content editor that can kind of cripple your application. So to avoid someone being able to do that, you want to have DOM purify. So what this means is that when someone types something in the rich content editor, and as soon as they start typing, this library right here is going to make sure that that does not happen. So if anyone tries to type in a very harmful XSS code, then it stops that code from being reactive. Essentially, that's my understanding from what I understood from GPT explaining it to me. So that is what this library does. So let's move on to our CSS file. Just like our playr CSS file, we also have a Quill CSS file. And this Quill CSS file is coming from our code sandbox as well. I have created a separate CSS file for this with my own modifications on top of it. So yeah, that is that for the CSS file right here. I was having the same issue when I had the style sheet on the head tag. It just completely crippled Wized for some reason. So as a workaround, I had to provide it inside. I had to do this inside a JavaScript inside the before body tag. And finally, that brings us to our comments. So let me just switch over to our tab 3, and you'll notice that this is just a simple empty div block. And the only thing that we have here is just the ID that says Disqus thread. Now, for the commenting portion of it, I'm using a uh, third party integration called Disqus. So let me just show you what we have here. So we have our comments here, which is basically just a Disqus embed. This is cool. Um, I think you can adjust the CSS or override the CSS if you like to, but I think there is a limitation to it. But yeah, there are some form of customization available for this. Initially, my plan was to create my own commenting system, but then I realized it was getting a little out of scope. Plus, I was running out of time as well. So I just decided to go with Disqus. And in if you're not familiar with Disqus commenting system, it's very simple. Basically, you just need to sign up to Disqus and then set up your. It takes you through an onboarding process. I'm not sure if I can get this here, but long story short, it provides you with a embed code, and you just drop that embed code inside your website, and it just starts creating all these comments for you. So and the best part about Disqus as well is that, let's say if I jump back into my demo here, as you can see, I have the ID, the course ID, and the chapter ID right here, and I've made this comment specific to this course and this chapter combination. So if I head over to the second chapter, let's say for instance, and click on comments here, you'll notice that the comment is not there. That's because we don't have a comment for this chapter inside this specific course. But if I were to go back to the first chapter again, click on comments, there we go. We have our commenting section. So Disqus remembers what combination of ID, the course ID, and the chapter ID. They need to display certain comments, hide away certain comments if need be. So yeah, a lot of cool under the hood stuff happening for Disqus. So yeah, that is that for Disqus. We're going to be setting up the embed code. You also need to modify that embed code uh, for Disqus to understand how the structuring works. So again, this is something we're going to be covering in just a bit. But yeah, that is that, and that brings us to the end of our Webflow setup. So yeah, we're good to get started on our Xano walkthrough. Okay, so now we're over on Xano, and we have 6 API endpoints that we need to learn about before we have a walkthrough on over on Wized. So the first one is a very important one, and that is going to be the dashboard get chapter details. So let's click into this one. So this API endpoint is responsible for enrolling the user onto a course if they're not enrolled into this course in the first place. Obviously, this is, as you can see, that we have a conditional running here in the event that if the user is enrolled into it or if they're not enrolled into it, we have two sets of various actions happening. So before we get to that, let's start from the top. As you know, for the inputs, we have chapter ID and we have course ID. Now, if I head over to our live app here, you'll notice that obviously our course ID and our chapter ID is coming straight from our URL parameters. And we grab that and we feed that to our Xano request. So, yep, that's that for the inputs. And then, firstly, obviously, if you have gone through episode 5, you know the intention and the purpose for our first function, which is get record from our users database. And as you know, that this API endpoint is password protect, so it requires authentication for this to be successful. So we grab the user's auth token and then we try to decipher if the ID of the user is matching the ID from our database. Once we find the match, then we proceed to our next function. So which brings us to function number 2, query all records from courses enrolled. So we're calling this and we're returning this as a variable that is called check courses enrolled. So we want to so let's say that when the user is enrolling into a course, the first main thing is to make sure that uh, we query all the records from our courses enrolled table. So let's head over there. Okay, so I'm already on the courses enrolled table. So this is our courses enrolled table. This is the courses ID, user's ID. So long story short, we just want to see if this user has this specific course enlisted in this database. That's the purpose of this. So if you look at the custom query here, so let's have a look. So we're making sure that courses enrolled. So the courses ID inside this database is matching the course ID from our input, and the user's ID is matching the user ID from our first function. And once if these conditions match, we just simply want to return a Boolean value to see if this is true or false. So that's why we're returning this as check courses enrolled. And then we have our third function, which is check to see if the user is enrolled to this course. So if I click into this, you'll see that this is a conditional statement where we're checking if courses enrolled is equals to true. So if it is true, then here are the set of actions that we are going to carry out. So what is the first action if it is true? So we start querying all the records from our courses database, and we're returning this as course. So if I click into this, so we're targeting our courses database with this custom query where we want to make sure that the courses ID is matching the course ID from our input. So if it does match, we want to basically return a single record. So as you can see, this is type single. We're not grabbing all the courses from, we don't need to. We just need to grab a single course. That's why we're calling it course instead of courses. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, and then we have a for each loop function on 3.2. So let's see what that is. Convert the MS duration to a string for each chapter duration. Um, this is something that has been covered on episode 5, so I'm not going to go too deep into this. But as you remember correctly, basically this function is responsible for converting. And if you remember correctly, all the duration for our chapters and our courses is recorded in milliseconds. So we want to convert that into a human readable time. And this function specifically actually targets this one right here. So see these chapters right here. So 1342, 7079, and then 8 minute 39 seconds. So it converts those milliseconds to human readable time. So that's what this function is doing. So let me just hop over onto this API here. And we basically run a custom function, and then we update the variable of duration with this function. So the function returns a human readable timestamp, and we insert that value inside this key right here within our course chapter item object. Okay, so to actually explain this better, I already went ahead and put in a chapter ID and course ID. I actually basically grabbed it from here, from this URL, just to point this out. So if I run this, okay, so let's see. So this is course chapter item duration. As you can see here, if I start closing all this, we have this array right here. We have a chapters playlist, which has all the chapters listed in here for this specific course. And you can see that the duration here returns a human readable timestamp. So let's say that if I were to disable this, so let's just disable this just to clarify it again. Let's run it again. And this time, you'll notice that all the duration is in milliseconds. So this function is responsible for all the chapters to have a human readable timestamp. So let's enable this back on. And I think I haven't explained this properly. So for this for each loop, we're targeting our course list, which is, if I close this one right here, we're just targeting this variable right here. And if you remember, this course contains the specific course we're looking for and the chapters related to that course, which is why we're targeting the course chapters as well. We're specifically targeting course chapters, and we're looping through each item as course chapter item. And then we're adding those duration into those. Okay, so let's move on to our next action here, and that is function number 3.3. And that is find the chapter that matches the chapter ID from the input, which is a query all records from chapter progress. Now, for those of you, if you don't remember, chapter progress is a separate database where when someone gets enrolled into it, we start adding all the chapters related to a course. So all the chapters are added into that database as a separate record. So anyway, we are querying all the chapter records from chapter progress, and we're returning it as chapter details. Let's click into this. We have custom query applied to it. So we have our chapter ID from our input, and we want to make sure that the chapter progress chapter ID is also, so basically the chapter ID from chapter progress database is matching the one from the input. And then we're also making sure that the user ID from the input also matches the user's ID from our chapter progress database. Okay, so once we find that, we return a single record. That's perfect because again, we are just focused on that single chapter. Hopefully that you understand the purpose of this function right here. Okay, so once we find that out, then we run a conditional on this, as you can see on function number 3.4. So if I move the cursor away, check if watch progress for this chapter is 100%. So this is a conditional. If I click into this conditional, we want to simply make sure that once we find that chapter, we want to make sure if that chapter is 100%. Now for clarity, I'm going to go ahead and jump over onto that table. So it's chapter progress right here. Let's look at these chapters over here. As you can see, we have all these chapters, and these are the chapters that is related to my account, my main primary account. And you can see that we can see the progress for each of the chapters that belongs to one course right here. So Figma to Webflow has 7 chapters in total. Out of all the 7 chapters, we have watch progress of 25% for the first episode right here. So yeah, let's jump back in here, and we're simply checking if the watch progress for this current chapter is equals 100. So, oh, I seem to have lost my way. Oh, I was over here. So let's open this up. Okay. Um, so if the statement is true, we simply update our variable. So we have chapter details. Now, if I click on run and debug, so if I run and debug this real quick, so we have our chapter details, which is it's a one giant object. So we are going to create this key right here, completed, which at the moment it shows true. So this specific chapter is completed. So that's why we have this key right here. We're creating this key called completed, and we're adding the value of true. Now, why are we adding the value of true? This is something that when we start configuring things out on Wized, it's going to make sense. But on the back end, it's very important that we need to set this key that has a Boolean value. And of course, the next one is else. So if it's not completed, we set this to false. Quite straightforward. All right, so function number 3.5, get the course chapter array from courses. Okay, so let's click into this and see what is happening. So we're creating a variable called chapters playlist, and we're storing all the course chapters from our course variable. So if you remember correctly, we have this course variable that returns all the related chapters related to this course. So we only grab the course chapters and we're storing that in this variable. The purpose of that is for this one right here. So if I take you over here, so all these chapters are coming from that variable. So just to clarify. Okay, so let's jump over to function 3.6, grab details about the course. So let's open this up and see what we have. Okay, so grab details about the course. So we have update variable where we are updating our object of chapter details. So we have the course name, and then we have the course summary, and then we have the tutor name, and then we have the tutor image. So in case if you're wondering where that information is being applied to, it's basically this right here: the course name, the chapter summary, the course summary, the tutor name, the tutor image, all that is being stored in here. Course name, course summary, tutor name, tutor image. Although I don't see um, the chapter name and the chapter summary, but we're going to find that out in just a bit. Okay, so that's what this group does here. Okay, so then we have our function number 3.7, which is check if chapter has been completed. So if we open this up, we are running a for each loop on the chapters playlist. So we have two functions in total where we are checking if the chapter has completed. So we have 3.7 where we're checking if the chapter has completed on the chapters playlist variable. And then we have another one over here, check if watch progress for this chapter is 100%. Now, two of these groups here have two separate functionalities, although they might sound the same. In this one over here, we're checking if the chapter that we're currently on is completed. And it's for a whole other purpose. And the purpose for this one right here is to make sure that the chapter playlist, which is this variable right here, each and every item in it, we're checking if the chapter is completed. If it is, then we're going to apply a check mark on it. So to explain this better, if I take you here, you'll notice that we have the check icons right here. This check icon relies heavily on that function right there. So this is the playlist. So just to apply this icon, we have that function in Xano. So that's what we're doing. So let's take a look. We have a for each loop. We have a chapters playlist, and we're looping through each item. Well, looping through each chapter as item. And then we query all records from chapter progress. And we have quite a few queries here. So we have the user ID, which is from our first function variable. We want to make sure that the user ID is matching the user ID from the chapter progress database. And then the item ID, which is the chapter ID, matching the chapter ID from the chapter progress database. And then the chapter progress, which is the watch progress, is equals 100%. So we want to make sure if this is completed. So we want to return this as exists. So is it a false or true value? And we're returning it as chapter progress item status. And then based on that, we run a conditional. So if it is true, then create a variable called completed and then insert the status into that variable. The same goes for else as well. So that's how we return a um, true or false Boolean value. So let me show you what that looks like. If I run this, and it's not the one, so it's not this one right here in chapter details, but if you scroll a bit further down, you'll notice that we have a separate chapters playlist array. And in that array, we have each and every object that has the key of completed, and it tells you if it's true or false. So the first one is true, the second one is true, the third object says false. So this is a do. So basically, this is the one that we're looking at in Xano right now. So as you can see, the first two are true. So Xano is returning that as true. So which is great. Alrighty. Hopefully, this is all making sense. I know it's quite complicated. It's a very complex project, but you may have to revise this a few times to really understand what's happening. All right, and then we have our function 3.8. Let's have a look. Add a key of active to each of the object in the playlist array. So if I open this up, this is a for each loop function that we're looping through chapters playlist, which is this one right here. So this time we're looping through each item as playlist item, and we have a conditional on top of it. So playlist, we want to make sure if the playlist item ID is matching the chapter ID from the input. If it does, we want to add a key of active, and then we're going to put in a value of true. And if it's false, we're going to put in a value of false. So let me show you. Let's run a debug. So Basically, what this means is, so as you can see, active is false. This one is active is true, but all of it is going to be false. What is the relevancy of this key and why do we need this key? That's the important question. So if I head over to the demo here, you'll notice that we're currently on the second chapter. But how do you know that we're on the second chapter? That's because if you look at the playlist here, the second chapter has a class of active on top of it, which indicates that we're on the second chapter. If I was on the third chapter, then the third chapter on that playlist should have the value of active to it. So using that Boolean value, we set the active class on Wized. That's how we're able to manage this straight from Xano. So that's the purpose of this function right here. And that brings us to the end of if the user is enrolled into this course. So now let's head over to what happens if the user is not enrolled in this course. So what we do is we have the first function, query all records from course. So we check up course ID from the input and try to match it with the course ID from our courses database. And we output this as a single, just a single record. Okay, so that makes sense. So let's take a look at our three function from 3.10, add the course to course enrolled database. So because we know that the course, this user is not enrolled in this course, that's why we're straight away adding this record in our courses enrolled database. So that's what we're doing. We're just adding the course details onto this database here. Okay, so for the next one, we have last played chapter, and you'll notice that we're using a Xano expression. The expression says that we're targeting the first chapter from the course chapter array inside our course variable. So let me, for recap, if you remember from our courses database, we have all our courses, and if you scroll, so if you go all the way to the end, we have courses chapter which is basically an array. And if you click into it, you'll find all the related chapters to this course. Now, because this user has never, well, is enrolling to this course for the very first time, by default, we're going to select the first chapter as a last played chapter. So you might be wondering, why is that important? Because if I take you to the dashboard here, so let me show you a live example. We're on the all courses, and let's wait for this to load up. And let's say that this, so as you can see, I'm not enrolled into this course. So if I click on play, this is going to take me to the first played to the first chapter, which is the listed as the last played chapter. So that's the reason why we need, it's very important that you have the first chapter of a given course and have that labeled as the last played chapter by default. And then we have completed, which is set to null, PDF URL, which is also set to, well, nothing over here. Okay, so we're just going to leave it as is. So that is that. So we're making sure that we're adding the record in courses enrolled. Now, let's see what we have for the create okay, so variable that stores all the chapters of the course from the last step. So let's open up and we have course chapters. We're creating a variable called course chapters and we're storing all the courses chapters of that given course inside this variable. Okay, that makes sense. So let's move on to the next action here, and that is add each chapter from the course as a single record. So like I explained before, we have each of the course chapter added into our separate database, and that is the chapter progress database. So we're running a for each loop function. So we're targeting our variable course chapters, which contains all the chapters of that given course. And we loop through each item as course chapter. And then we add that record in our chapter progress. So we have now created we have the chapter name, which is coming from the course chapter variable, the chapter ID, description, watch progress, which is nothing. And then we have duration, courses ID, users ID, and video ID, all that coming from our variable. So this is, again, very self-explanatory. So yeah, that's where once we add that, then what are we doing is, let's move away. So convert the MS duration to a string for each chapter duration. Again, by now, you already know what this is doing. So I'm just going to skip this one. All right, so let's have a look at this one. Find the chapter that matches the chapter ID from the input. Okay, so clearly we are trying to see if the chapter from the chapter details variable, where is the chapter detail variable? Okay. So we're querying this. All right. So we're querying this. My bad. I got confused there for a second. So we're trying to match the chapter ID with the chapter ID from the chapter progress and the user ID from the user ID in the chapter progress database. And let's see what we're trying to return here. We're returning as a single item. Okay, that makes sense. So, and then what we're doing is we're updating the variable. So we're grabbing chapter details and we're setting this completed key as false. Now, if you remember this, we also have something similar in the true statement. The purpose of that is something that we will find out in Wized. And the purpose of this over here on the false statement is also something we're going to figure out on Wized. But essentially, what we're trying to do is basically our video player is going to decide if the chapter is completed or isn't completed. Based on the value of that, our video player will record the last playback position of a given chapter. So, again, we're going to dive deeper into that in just a bit. Okay, so let's move on to our next function here. So we have grab details about the course. Okay, so this is the course name, course summary, tutor name, tutor image. We've already covered this. So let's skip this ahead. Get the course chapter array from courses. So again, this is the creating the chapter playlist, which is something we've also covered, and we're repeating this for the false statement. And then we have check if chapter has been completed. And if you remember correctly, we're creating a variable here so that we can apply the chapter icon, the active combo class. So that's the purpose of this group right here. And then we have add a key of active to each of the object in the playlist array. So we want to see which chapter is the active chapter. And because this is in the false statement, we know that by default, this is always going to be the first chapter, which is going to have the key of active present. So yeah, that brings us to the end of this API endpoint, and we're returning chapter details for, so let me just click into one of these chapters. Actually, let's click into this chapter here. So to summarize, the chapter details returns this portion of your screen. So the video, the overview, so all this portion of it is basically returned by chapter details, and the chapter playlist returns the information for the playlist right here. So let's hop over to Xano. So let's hop over to our next API endpoint. And oh, actually, before we do that, let's make sure to revert all our changes because this is perfect the way it is. Okay, now next on the list we have is the get notes. So let's look for that. So it's this one right here, get notes. And this is basically for the inputs, we have course ID. And based on our course ID, we want to make sure that we grab all the notes related to that course. We have custom query applied to this. So we want to make sure that the auth token, the ID from the auth token that we're grabbing, matches the user's ID from the notes database table. So there we go. We have our notes here. So we just simply want to check if we are grabbing all our notes for this specific course. And we're returning a list for this. So yeah, that's pretty much it for getting our notes. Now let's move on to our next API endpoint, and that would be adding notes. So let's move on to add notes. All right, so it's right there. Again, this is quite a simple one. So we have course ID, something that we're grabbing from our URL parameter. The chapter ID, we're also grabbing this from our URL parameter, timestamp, note, and chapter name. So these are something that we're also grabbing from not our URL parameter, but we're actually using custom JavaScript to accomplish this. So when I click on notes and when I'm creating, let's say I'm creating note, we're grabbing the timestamp from here. We're grabbing the chapter name from here. Well, actually, that's not the chapter. That is, oh yeah, that is the chapter name. And then we grab the course name as well. Wait, are we grabbing the course name? I don't think we're grabbing the course name because we're just grabbing the chapter name, but we're grabbing the course ID. So let's, yeah, so timestamp note. And then obviously we have the actual note where we have our note and chapter name, chapter ID, and course ID. Okay, so we're grabbing the ID for the chapter ID and course ID. So this all makes sense. And obviously we have a simple action of adding that record onto our notes and quite self explanatory. So, yes, we're going to move on to the next one. And the next on the list we have is the edit note. So let's click into this one. We have note ID and note. So this is for the event where you want to modify your existing note. Obviously, um, if I head over here, we have our note ID embedded in here. So whenever you find yourself clicking into the edit mode for a specific note, Wized already grabs the note ID, and then if you save this note, we're going to send that note ID over to Xano. So that's how we're getting the note ID, and then of course we also have the note coming from our Quill JS editor. For the edit record in notes, this is quite standard stuff. So yeah, let's move on to our next API endpoint, and that's going to be removing notes. This is a very, very simple, straightforward function, API endpoint as well. This is a delete, and we have a note ID. So we just simply need the note ID in order to delete a record from our notes. So finally, we are going to move over onto our last API endpoint for Xano, and that is the update chapter course progress. So this is extremely important to and actually the most critical API endpoint for our LMS platform. And this API endpoint is responsible for updating and tracking the user's progress as they watch through each and every chapter within a given course. This is solely responsible for, tracking your course progress and then therefore generating our certificate as well. And essentially, providing the entire experience of the LMS application. Okay, so that being said, let's have a look at our inputs here. We have chapter ID, we have course ID, and we have last watched. So if I open this up, so basically the chapter ID is coming from our URL parameter. The course ID is also coming from our URL parameter. And as for last watched, now, this is coming from a Wized variable. So what this does is basically it tells Xano that, hey, the user has watched up to a certain point of a given video within that course. So it's basically we store that. Well, we have a custom JavaScript that actually grabs that information in the form of milliseconds and then sends that over to Xano. And then Xano grabs that milliseconds, and then we do all the processing inside our function stack, and we save that onto our database. So that's that for the input. So let's move on to the function stack as we do have quite a bit to cover here. So for the first function, we have get record from users. And obviously by this point, you know the reason why we're doing this. All right, and then we have our second function, which is, so if I just move the cursor away from here, double check if user is enrolled into course the chapter belongs to. So we're checking if the user is enrolled into this. Now, one thing I want to clarify is um, the reason why I have done this step is to create this conditional step here. So this is going to make sense in just a bit. So let's click into this. So we are querying all the records from our courses enrolled database, and we're returning this as courses enrolled check. So if I open the custom query here, we're making sure that the user ID matches the user ID from the courses enrolled, and the course ID matches the courses ID inside the courses enrolled database. That's again, just like all our other API endpoints, we have the same query here. We're returning this as a Boolean. So we want to make sure that if it's true or false, and we're returning this as courses enrolled check. So far, this makes sense. Then we have a conditional based on what would happen if the user is indeed enrolled into this course. If I open this up, you'll notice that we have then, obviously we have all our functions related to then, but we have nothing else for else. So the question is, if the user wasn't enrolled into this course, what would have happened? We just return a error. And to be quite honest, there's a far more sophisticated way of setting this up rather than setting up a conditional. I could have just created a precondition function if I wanted to return an error message saying that, hey, the user is not enrolled into this course. So, and then, later move on to showing a UI message on the front end just to show the user that, hey, you actually haven't enrolled into this course. But instead, what I've done is I've created a conditional, which is a bit excessive in my opinion. Looking back at it now, I should have actually converted this into a precondition. But even if you go for a conditional here, there's no harm in this. So it's all going to make sense why that is as we start breaking this down. That being said, let's open this up. We have a conditional where we're checking courses enrolled check return is true. So which means that the user is enrolled into this, which brings us to our next function here where we start off with the then. All right, so we are querying all records from our chapter progress database. So if I just put my cursor here, get chapter details. Okay, so we're trying to get chapter details from the input ID. So we're simply trying to get all the information from our chapter ID here. So let's look at the custom query. We want to make sure course ID matches courses ID from chapter progress, user ID for chapter progress, and chapter ID from chapter ID progress as well. Once that is done, we want to return a single record and we grab all the information that we can regarding that specific chapter. Okay. Then we have another conditional applied here. So as you can see, quite a lot of stuff happening. So let's have a look at the first one. So this condition simply checks that is not 100%. So we want to make sure that the watch progress of that given chapter is not 100. So if I take my cursor here, we want to check if the chapter has not been previously completed. So if this is true, so if it's not 100, then we start the following actions. So let's look into this and see what that is. So our first action within that conditional is to create a variable. So let's move my mouse here. So we are calculating the chapter's watch progress percentage. So, okay, so we create a variable called chapter watch percentage, and you'll notice that I've used Xano expression here instead of using Xano's filters. The reason why I personally went with Xano expression is because it's a lot faster, and you don't have to create a lot of functions, and also it only takes like a minute or two when you instruct GPT on how to create your Xano expression. So therefore, I went with the whole expression route instead of using Xano's native filters. So let's have a look at this. All right, so we're targeting the last watched input, as you can see here. And then we have variable, we're targeting we're dividing this with the variable get chapter duration. So it's this variable right here, and we're targeting the duration within the duration key within that variable right here. So if I remember correctly, each of our chapter has a duration. So the reason we are carrying out this function right here is to simply figure out the progress that the user has made based on their last watch point. So let's say if the total duration of a given chapter is 5 minutes and you've watched, I don't know, 2.5 minutes, then that means you've watched almost 50% of that given chapter. So that's what we're doing here. Then we multiply that with 100. And then whatever that value is, we apply a round filter on top of it. So in case if you're not familiar with what round filter is, it it makes sure that if you have a decimal value, it rounds it up. So that's what the round filter is for. Okay, so we're calculating the chapter watch percentage on this function. Let's look at the set of next function here, edit record in chapter progress. And we're returning this as update chapter. So let's see what we're doing here. We are trying to get the chapter. Okay, so we're targeting the ID and we're trying to match this with the ID from the get chapter variable, which is this one right here. Once we find a match, we want to edit the record. So we want to update our column watch progress. So that's where we put in our recently calculated watch percentage, and we also put in the watched till. Let's head into our okay. So let's just take a look at this first record right here. As you can see, we have a watch progress, watch till. So this tells you up to what point did the user watch this video till, and what is the total duration of that given video. So as you can see that the way this calculation is done, Xano does the calculation and then Xano returns the percentage based on that. Even though the watch till isn't matching the duration, this is sort of a close approximate calculation done by Xano. So yeah, I don't completely understand it myself, but apparently if the watch till goes a little bit closer to the duration and not completely accurate, uh, doesn't hit the same accurate mark as the duration, Xano will mark this as 100% either way. So the purpose of this function here is we're, again, updating the watch percentage, and we just want to record the last watch playback time into our database. So if I also head over into our demo app. Okay, so as you can see, you can see that I have been watching the chapters and everything. So if I click on resume, this is going to take me back to the last played chapter. And the last played chapter was chapter 1. And as you can see, chapter 1 is completed. If I click on chapter 2, so I'm actually going to hit pause here. So mute here, sorry. So yeah, so as we start playing the video, we are constantly sending back the last played back position. So in our database, you'll notice that I am currently, actually, if I just click here, I'm currently in 3 seconds right now. This information is recorded in our database. So it's pretty cool. We're using custom JavaScript to accomplish that. So we're making that call over to Xano every 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds, we're letting Xano know that, hey, the user watched up to this point. So let's record that in our database. Okay. So update the last watch. Okay. So this one, okay. So we've just covered this. So let's move on to this one. And this is get all chapters related to this course. Let's open this up. So we're making a query all records, running a query all records on chapter progress with this custom query. So we're making sure that the user ID matches and the course ID matches with the ones in chapter progress database. And let's see what we're trying to return. Okay, so we are trying to return a list. So let's see why that is. And we're returning this as chapters all. And then we have another variable, and we create a variable and we're calling it total watch time, and we're setting a default value of 0. Why is that? It's all going to make sense in just a bit. So let's have a look at our next function here. So we're calling this add the total watch time of all the chapters. So, okay, let's see. Let's open this up. So we're targeting chapters all, which is this variable right here that we just ran all the query all records to. And as we're looping through each and every item, we're calling that chapter. And we're updating our variable here. So we're calling this total watch time and replacing it with total watch time again, which is this variable right here. And we're adding the chapter watched till. So we're trying to basically add this key of watch till. So, so basically what's happening is that the reason why we're doing that is so that when we get the payload on the front end, we know up to what point the user has watched this chapter till. It's very important so that we can also play back the position. So what I mean by that is, let me actually show you right here. Oh, so this is on. Oh, right, it's right here. Okay, so let's say that in this example, um, I'm going to pause here. So as you can see that the user has watched till the 8th second mark. Now, what I mean is if I go back into the dashboard and let's say that I click on resume here. So there as you can see, it starts playing from the 8-second mark because it remembers that for this specific chapter, this is my last playback position. So this is what we're trying to accomplish with this function right here. We're trying to record the watch till for each and every chapters that we have. Okay. All right. So let's move on to our next function here. We have a query all records from courses, and we're returning this as course total duration. If I move my cursor and see what we're trying to do here, fetch the total duration on the course. Okay, so we're trying to fetch the total duration of that course, that the chapter that the user is watching. So it's just a simple query all record. So we want to make sure that the course ID from the input matches the course's ID from the courses database. We're trying to return a single record because we're just trying to find a match for that specific course. And then we are creating a variable on our next action. So let's move away. So let's see what we're trying to do here. We're calculating the user's watch progress percentage. We have a Xano expression on top of it. So we're targeting the variable called total watch time, which is this variable right here. But obviously, this variable is updated through this loop here. Again, I don't think I explained this correctly, but if I click back into this, what this variable does is we're actually calculating the total watch time that the user has accumulated for all the chapters within that course. That's what this variable does. So let's click into the watch percentage here. So we grab the value for that, and then we divide it with course total duration, and then we are grabbing the duration part of it within that variable. So it's this one right here, and then we multiply it with 100, and then we round it up. So again, let me explain what's happening. Let's say that the total duration. So what's happening is that let's say that the course has a total duration of 5 hours, and you've watched 2.5 hours. And your total watch time is 2.5 hours. So we divide that. So this is going to return 50% in return. So you've watched 50% of the total course, not the chapter, the course in total. So that's what we're accomplishing in this function right here. Okay, once we've calculated the watch percentage, then what we want to do is we're running a query all record on our courses enrolled database. Again, using our same custom query, we are trying to return a single record. Why are we doing that? This is going to make sense in the next step. So the next step is update the user's watch progress. So if I click into this, you'll notice that we are targeting our courses enrolled database table. So we're trying to find the ID. We're trying to match with the ID that matches with the courses enrolled ID, which is coming from here. So we want to make sure that we're targeting the right course. And within that course, we want to update the watch percentage progress and the last played chapter of that given course. So if I go into our Xano database here and head back into courses enrolled, so let's look at our first course here, the first record here. You'll notice that we have a progress column and we also have a last played chapter column. So essentially, that's what we're updating. We just want to update that the user has watched, let's say, 50% of this given course, and this was the last played chapter. And if you remember correctly, we have UID, we have a unique ID for each and every chapter. So we record that ID um, within that column. So let me show you what that looks like in over here. Let's say that instead of episode 2, maybe I jump into this episode right here. So the moment I hit play, let me just make sure to mute this. The moment I hit play, now Xano's going to register this chapter as the last played chapter. So if I just pause this and go back to my dashboard, now if I hit resume, so you'll notice that it takes me to the same playback position. So if I just click here, and it's taken me to this specific episode, like I played it before. So I'm going to pause this, but again, you get the idea of what this accomplishes. All right. So that's what we're doing in this action right here. Okay, so let's move on to our next action, which is this is an interesting one. Generate a certificate PDF if user completes the course. Now, whilst when we're updating all the course progress and everything, and if we find out that, hey, you know what? The user just actually completed their entire course. So that's why we want to make sure that if that happens, and whilst we're updating all that, we also want to create the certificate for that course. And I don't know if you remember, but on the demo, I did mention that we're using a third party service called DocuGenerate, which is this amazing document generating PDF generator. You can create custom PDFs and documents as well if you want to. So let's dive into this. So as you can see, there's quite a lot happening here. So let's go through this one by one. All right, so for the first function, we have query all records from courses enrolled. So we're trying to match the user ID and the course ID, and let's see what we're trying to return this as. So we're trying to return a single record from that database. Why is that? Let's find out. So if I click on conditional, okay, so we have a few conditional happening here. We want to make sure that the watch percentage is 100%. The completed column is set to null, and the PDF URL is set to null. If I take you to the database here, just for clarification, we have two columns here, completed and PDF URL. So the completed column would basically record the day that you have completed the entire course, and the PDF URL is going to be a URL where you can download your certificate. So that's what we're making sure. The reason why we want to make sure that they're null is so that they're if this is something that you've done for the first time, then we want to make sure that we're actually executing our request um, correctly. So if this is filled up, that means chances are you've already generated the PDF for this, so there's no longer needed for this function right here. Okay, so we're trying to evaluate this. Let's query all record and let's see what I think I missed a step here. All right, so that's what the conditionals are. So let's move on to what happens if our conditions are true. You'll notice that for the else, we're not doing anything. So this is just blank. Okay, so we're querying all the records from our courses database. So we're trying to match the courses ID from the courses database and the ID from our input, and we're outputting this as a single record. Then from that single record, we create a variable and we're trying to get the course name from the courses, and we're storing that in a variable called course name. And then we're creating another variable where we're calling it full name, and we're storing the user's first name and last name, and basically storing the user's full name inside this variable. And then we have another variable, and we're calling this completion date, where we are basically making sure that we're recording the timestamp, and then we're formatting that timestamp as well. Once you have created all these variables, then we're going to make an API request over onto DocuGenerate. Now, before I dive into this, let me head over to DocuGenerate. So this is my Flowacademy certificate template. So by default, I have a Word document. So if I click into this, you'll notice that this is what my certificate looks like. Of course, this is a demo, so the certificate is extremely simple looking, but in reality, it would be a lot more, it would have a lot more design to it. But the setup is going to be pretty much the same. We have three variables here. We have full name, we have course name, and we have completion date. So it would be full name has successfully completed the course, and then we put in the course name on, and then we put in the date. And then we sign off with Flowacademy right here. So you'll notice that DocuGenerate detected our tags here. So full name, course name, and completion date. So yeah, that's that for the setup. The setup is quite easy. Also, another thing to point out is each and every document has a ID. So in case if you're wondering how you can get the ID, because you need the ID for your API request. So it's in the URL. So as you can see, my ID, my document ID is right here. Okay, perfect. So now what we're going to do is head over to settings. And for the settings, you need to go into developer. So once you head into developers, all you need is an API key. So make sure to click on generate API key. It's going to create an API key for you. And that's that. You need to apply that. You need to put that API key inside your Xano environment variable. Also, another thing to point out is that they have a separate documentation page. So if I click into this, so they have their entire documentation details right here. It's beautiful. It's very easy to understand. So I highly recommend that you check it out when you get the time. For our demo, this is the one that we're focused on. So we want to generate a document. So if you click into this, it will show you all the parameters that you need to be aware of. Also, it tells you exactly how you need to construct your API. So if I click here, it shows you what each and every what to expect from each and every parameter when you apply that into your API. So you might have noticed that if I head over to our Notion doc, I've already provided the curl request that you need for your Xano request. So let's go through this real quick. We're making a post request and into post request to this URL. Then we have our authorization. So content type set to application JSON and authorization. This is where you need to insert your API key, and this API key is stored inside your Xano environment variable. Then we have a object here where we enclose all the details that we need to create our document, to create our certificate. So first, you need to specify the template ID. So, and then you have to create an array called data, and inside that array, you need to specify full name, course name, and completion date. So, which we already constructed. So, as you can see, you need to insert the value for the full name, which we stored it inside a Xano variable, the course name, and the completion date. And then lastly, you want to make sure that you want to specify how you want to have this document outputted as. So in our case, it's a PDF. Um, if I jump over onto Xano, the construction of this API is extremely simple. If you just go through this, whatever you're seeing here is basically from the curl request that I've provided on the Notion document. So as you can see, I'm using the replace filter here for the API key here and replacing this with our DocuGenerate API key. So again, just to remind you, if you head over to settings here and switch into manage, you'll find where did I put it? There we go. So we have the DocuGenerate API key. Make sure to replace this with yours in this. And yeah, that itself should help us accomplish what we are trying to do here on our endpoint. Okay, so once we have made that request over to DocuGenerate, let's see what we're trying to do here. We have a query all records from courses enrolled. So we are trying to match the users, trying to grab the courses ID. I believe, yeah, okay, so we're trying to return a single record. Once we return that single record, we grab the ID from that record so that we can make sure that we're targeting the right record. And we want to make sure that we are inputting the completion date and the PDF URL from the API request. And that's how we generate the certificate as well. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, so let's close this. So that is done. And then we have our convert the watch percentage as a string. Okay, so this is an interesting one. So what we're doing is we've already calculated the watch percentage, but what I haven't done is if you look at this variable right here, we're just returning the number on this function here. And later on this function, we are converting that into a string. So we grab that number and we're basically adding the percentage to this. So let's say if the number here in this function is 50, we want to make sure that that percentage symbol is added to that number 50 and it gets converted into a string. So for context, if I take you to the dashboard here, this watch percentage is for this right here. So that's how we're measuring the overall progress of a given course. Okay. So then we have another check if this chapter is completed. So we are checking if the chapter is completed. Um, that's because, and if you remember this correctly, we also have done similar actions on our previous endpoints. And we just simply want to make sure that we're returning a key called chapter completed. So if I go through query all records, we're trying to, okay, let's see what we're trying to do here. Let me open up the custom query. Opening up, we're trying to match a user ID, chapter ID to chapter progress. Okay, so we're targeting chapter progress and we are trying to check if the chapter has been completed. And we have a conditional that if the chapter is 100% completed, then we create a variable called chapter completed, which is set to true. And if not, then we set it to false. And the reason why we're creating this variable is to simply create for two reasons, actually. So if I jump over onto the dashboard here, if I click into resume here, so like I mentioned, when we're playing a chapter, we're constantly recording the last playback position. But if we find out that the chapter has been completed, then we don't do that anymore. So let's say that if this chapter, which has been completed, if I click into this and if I start playing this, we don't actually update our Xano database at all. We don't make any sort of request over to Xano because this chapter is completed. There is no need to update Xano on this anymore for this specific chapter. So that's why we are creating this little group here. So that brings us to the end of the then scenario for the condition if the chapter watch progress is not 100. And if it is 100, then we just simply create a variable for else, which is chapter completed, which is set to true. So yeah, just easy peasy. The system is aware that the chapter is completed, so there is no need for any further action. And that itself finally brings us to the end of our Xano endpoint, and we're ready to rock and roll our Wized requests and action. So now we're over on Wized, and like I mentioned before, I've already gone ahead and set up all the requests and actions for the entire app. So we're just simply going to be walking through the requests and the actions specifically, because the requests. So over here, I have created a separate folder called course, which focuses on the course page. So we're currently on the dashboard learning page, and we have the learning folder here. So if I open up the course page, it has all our API endpoints and all the requests for it have been constructed. I'm not going to go through this. Very easy to understand what's happening here. So I'm just going to skip this completely. Instead, we're just going to jump over onto our actions here. And you'll notice that I have created a separate folder called dashboard course. And we have a separate folder called dashboard learning, which covers all the actions for our this page right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on resume here and head into our course page. So if I open this up, you'll notice that we're currently in the dashboard course page. And if I open up the canvas, you will see that we have our ID here and we have our chapter URL parameter. So that's how Xano knows that, hey, this is what we need to present on this page. And that being said, obviously, I have also created additional variables. As we start walking through each and every action, it's going to make sense what those variables are and their purpose of it as well. So let's open this folder up. We have 41 actions in total. My numbering was a little inaccurate, so I had to put 00 here. All right, so for the first action, and this is quite a basic one, we have get user details. So for this very first action, we're making sure that we are executing our get user detail request on page load. And we want to make sure that it only happens when we are in the dashboard course page. Then once this is done, we also want to make sure that we validate the user just to check if the user is a logged in user and if it's a valid member as well. If not, we're going to boot them out either to the select a plan member page or to the authorization to the login page. However, that validation action is not in this folder. So just wanted to point that out. If I scroll all the way back up here, we have this action called validate user, which is inside the learning folder. So as you can see, we have that action right here. Again, this is something that has been already covered in our last episode. So let's go back into this. And then we have get chapter details. So we want to get the chapter details. So we are accomplishing this by waiting for the request to finish, which is the get user details. We wait for that request to finish, and then we perform our request called get chapter details. Okay, then let's move on to our next action, which is set chapter detail variable. So once the request of get chapter detail is finished, we are setting a variable. We're calling this variable chapter details, where we store the entire information. So if I show you the chapter details payload, so we have the entire information of this chapter, like our watch progress, how much did we watch this till, what is the total duration of this chapter, and then the course ID, user ID. So we have everything. And then we also have the playlist, which you see over here. So right here, which is an array of all the playlists that we have, which is amazing. We're storing all that inside our chapter detail variable. Then we have another one called set chapters playlist variable. So we have a separate, again, same thing, but we have a separate variable and we're calling it chapter playlist. And in there, we're storing all the chapters playlist which is basically coming from our get chapter details. So if I show you the payload again, so it's this one right here. So we're storing the entire chapter playlist inside this chapter playlist variable. Awesome. Now let's move on to the next action. And this is called set visibility to course loader. So if I jump over onto Webflow here, our course loader is this element right here, our skeleton loader. So just to confirm, let me just make sure if I'm actually targeting the right element. Yep, there we go, course loader. So that's the correct element. And we want to make sure that it's only visible when get chapter details is requesting. Okay, so far it makes sense. Let's move on to the next action. Then we have set visibility to course content. Uh, Obviously, this is the content that wraps the entire content of this page. So if I hop over onto Webflow, and I believe it's this folder right here, this div block, course content. Yep, that's the one. So let's jump back in here, and I have lost it. Oh, there we go. So that's the action right here. We want to make sure that this is visible when our get chapter details is successful. Okay. Then we have set breadcrumb text. Okay, now from this point on, I think it's quite simple. So I'm going to skip this one. Let's look at this one here. Action number 7, add attribute to video player. So we have this attribute. So we're targeting the video player. And if you remember correctly from the last episode, sorry, not the last episode, actually, just a minute ago, to be honest, we were talking about our video player, and we have these attributes applied to our video player, but we have to add 2 more attributes on top of it. And this is the action where we do it. So the first one is data player embed ID. So this is extremely crucial. So so our video player needs to have this data attribute attached to this so that the player library knows that this is a YouTube embed. And then you need to attach the video ID. So which is coming from our chapter detail variable. But if I show you the get chapter details payload here, we actually have a video ID, which is the YouTube video ID. So essentially, this is what we're dropping it in here. And then we have a data player provider. So we're specifying that this is a YouTube video because player JavaScript also allows Vimeo as well. So the setup for Vimeo is a little bit different. So you have to provide what provider this is. So in our case, this is YouTube. Perfect. So that is that. And then we have action number 8, run player JS and its other functions. So we're waiting for get chapter details to be, so for that request to finish. And then we run this entire custom code. Well, once the function finishes. Now there's a lot happening here, and this is a very, very critical custom code. So to explain this better, I'm going to hop over onto our Notion document and see if okay, so I'm on the right area. Okay, so we have run player JS and other functions. So rather than going through all this, I'm just going to go through here because again, GPT prompts here, yeah, the description here is quite easy to understand. All right, so first we are set initializing our player video. So that's what we're doing here. And then resume playback. The system should automatically resume video playback from the last watch position, ensuring users can continue learning without manually. Okay, so that's what this is happening. We also have a Wized variable called chapter last watched till. So if I go back into this code, there's actually two variables that you have to be mindful about. One is called chapter last watch till, which is this variable right here. If I can find it. Okay, yeah, there we go. Chapter last watch till. So that's the first variable. And then we have another variable called last watched value to update. Now, these two variables have two very, very critical function. So if I jump over onto Wiz here, and if I show you the payload, as you can see that we have this variable in our payload that says watch till, and then we have this number here, 7,886. That's basically milliseconds. So this information is coming from, if I actually move over to the data store here, scroll over here. So chapter last watch till 7,886. So on page load, okay, assuming that you have watched a fair bit of this chapter, this given chapter right here, we grab that value and we store that inside this variable right here. And chapter last watch till, this basically kind of uh, stores the value of how till what point did you watch this chapter to? That's it. This is what this variable does. And then we have another variable here, last watched value to update. Now, this is something I won't be able to show you on Wized because if I start playing this video, it doesn't exactly play. So you can't play this video inside of Wized. Like you need to um, basically watch it on the actual browser and not inside Wized, unfortunately. So what happens is when we start playing this video, every 5 seconds, that custom code basically makes a request. This request right here is to be specific. Update chapter watch progress, the one that we've just covered now. So it basically makes that request with the value in this variable last watched value to update. So the way the custom code functions is that every 5 seconds, it grabs the time, the current playback position, and stores it in this variable in the form of milliseconds. Once it's successfully stored, it executes that Xano request. Once that Xano request is executed, we return the updated payload and we make sure to update this right here. And in the process, we also update several other variables, but we're going to cover that in just a bit. Now, just to show you what I mean by that, let's say that this chapter right here, which has never been played before, if I click into this and you can see what type of data it returns. As you can see, I've never played this chapter before. So the chapter last watch till is 0 because we don't know. This user never played this chapter before. So, which is very interesting. So let's hop over on to our Notion document. Hopefully that makes sense. And let me see if I can explain anything else that's happening. As users watch a video, the system needs to periodically update their watch progress. This is crucial for tracking learning progress across sessions and is managed by executing a Wiz request named update chapter, which is something that I've already explained. Formatted time display, displaying the playback time in a user-friendly format, hour, minute. Okay, now this functionality right here is basically this portion of the code. Now, in case if you're wondering why do we need this function and what exactly are we accomplishing with this, it's for this one right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reload this page and move over to this chapter here. So if I mute this. And if I head over to the notes section, you'll notice that this real playback time is coming from here. So the video plays back here and it's reflected over here. So that's what our function is for. Oh, I'm going to skip out of that. I'm going to pause that. Okay, so let's hop over onto our Notion doc. Okay, formatted time display. Okay, we already covered this. Smart playback adjustments. The script intelligently decides whether to resume playback from the last watch position or to start over. Okay, so this is a very interesting one and something that you might find, yeah, it's really cool. So let's say that I'm watching this chapter and I'm going to stop the video here. And as you can see that I've watched this till 33 seconds. Now, remember how I mentioned that every 5 seconds we are executing the Xano request to make sure Xano is completely updated with our last playback position? But if for any reason, if you take this playback head back to this point and then you start playing it back, this will no longer update Xano with your last playback position. So because it knows that you watched up till episode to 33-second time uh, to 33-second time mark, so it's not going to update that. But once you exceed the 33rd second, it's going to start making that request again. So yeah, again, this is something I won't be able to preview over here, show you this over here, but yeah, this is something that's happening under the hood. Okay, and then we have a event-driven playback control. The video player reacts to various events like ready, play, pause to manage playback. This includes starting playback, updating progress on play, and clearing intervals on pause to efficiently manage resources. Okay, I guess it's just something that's covered in the JS because I don't know what this is talking about. All right. So dynamic UI updates, real-time updates to the playback time are displayed, offering users immediate feedback on their current position within the video. So I assume it's basically talking about our notes here, our notes timeline. But yeah, that's pretty much what this code does here. So if I can find the action, so that's what action number 8 does. All right, so next we have set course name text where we're setting the course name. I'm going to skip all the setting and rendering. Those are pretty easy stuff. So set chapter name, set chapter description, render chapter playlist. Okay, so we have chapter playlist here. By now, we all know how to render as chapter playlist. Set playlist item name. These are pretty basic stuff. Set chapter. Okay. Set chapter playlist URL. Okay. So that's up till episode action number 19. We're good. Let's see what's happening on action 20. Set chapter last played till variable. So when our request finishes, which is the get chapter details, we want to set the variable chapter last watch till, which is something we've already covered. We're setting that variable with the last chapter watch till value here, which is something that is returned by our payload. So as you can see, watch till is 0. So that's going to be 0. Okay, that makes sense. Let's move on to the next one. Set chapter completed variable. Okay, so we have another variable called chapter completed. So if I show you the data store here, you'll notice that chapter completed so it states false. That's because the chapter is not completed. And if we take a look at our payload, which is something we were actually reviewing on Xano, so as you can see, it says false. If we take a look at our payload, so we're looking for the variable that says completed. So it's this one right here. So as you can see, Xano kind of knows that we haven't actually completed this chapter. Okay, let's move on to our next action here. Action number 22. So in this action, what we're simply doing is basically, and if you remember correctly, our video player is constantly executing this request, update chapter watch progress every 5 seconds. So that's why we want to make sure that whenever our payload returns anything, we are constantly setting our chapter completed set to true. So best way to show you, actually, I can't show you this. So this is something you'd have to discover it yourself. But the closest thing I can get to is if I click on the first chapter, as you can see, it's clearly completed. The chapter completed is comes to true. So yeah, which is not a great example, but hopefully you understand. Okay, so we were in action number 22. So let's take a look at action number 23. Okay, set visibility for chapter completed icon. So in this action, we're simply setting the visibility for our chapter completed icon. So let's open this up. So v chapter playlist v index completed is set to true. So whenever the chapter that we're currently on is marked as true, then we want to display the, well, not the chapter that we're on, but the chapter that is in the playlist. And if it's marked as true, completed is set to true, then we want to display this icon here, this check icon. That's what we're doing here. And then we have action number 24, set visibility to completed icon real time. This is an interesting one. So basically, what we're doing here is you might have noticed uh, that okay, actually, the best way to explain this in action number 23, because we've stated that whenever the chapter is completed set to true, we want to show the icon. But what if we want to show the icon as we finish the chapter in real time? That's what this action does. It makes sure, so we have a custom code for this. Let's hop over onto Notion. And like I mentioned before, that our video player is constantly executing our update chapter request. So in the process, we're running this code over here that runs every 1 second to check that if that request is returning the chapter completed, the completed variable set to true. So that's how we're able to display the completed icon in real time. So what I mean by that is let's head over to the actual. So let's say I'm on episode number 2, which I am right now, and I'm going to drag it all the way up to here. So just keep an eye on here. So as you can see, it has popped up now. So it showed up on real time. That's because of our custom code right here. This code makes that possible. So you might be wondering, well, we have already set the visibility on this action. Why do we need this separate action here? Because, well, this action only works once you have reloaded the page. So this action right here, action number 24, accomplishes the real-time issue. So in real time, you're able to reflect that change over to the user immediately. All right, so let's hop over onto our next actions. This action is called set real-time playback duration, which is targeting real-time timestamp. Let's switch the X-ray on. I believe it's the one inside notes. So if I switch the X-ray on, yep, that's the one, real-time timestamp. So like I mentioned before, and I don't think I have mentioned this, you'll notice that it's coming from playback real time. So if I hop over onto here, so as I start playing this, yeah. So as you can see, when the video player is playing back the video and the timestamp that you see, the real time timestamp is being reflected here, it's actually being, firstly, it's being inputted into our variable, our Wized variable, which is playback real time. And then from there, we are setting the text over here. Hopefully that makes sense. That's what this action is accomplishing here. All right. Now onto our other big action right here, which is the run Quill editor JS. If I hop over onto Notion, so this is our run Quill editor JS. It's quite a massive code, but in reality, it's actually accomplishing quite a few things. But what it's actually doing is it's making sure. So if I hop over onto Wized here, it's making sure that it initializes our note editor right here. And you'll also notice that we have plenty of other note editors. What I mean by that is, let's say that I write a note here. This is a test 1, and let's create that note. So we have our primary note editor, and then we have our secondary note editor, which is basically for our uh, the notes that we've already created. So this is to edit those notes. So that's what this is accomplishing here. Let's take a look at our Notion doc to see what else it does. Rich utilize the Quill editor. Okay, so we have initializing the Quill editor, dynamic content validation, implement functions to check if the editor's content is empty. And okay, so another key function that it covers is making sure that the user does not create an empty node. So I'm going to open up the data store here and I'm going to show you that all our data is basically stored. Now, the data in here, which is from the main parent uh, editor, is stored all in this variable. So whenever you click on create note, we're actually sending a request. If I head over here, so add note, if I open this up, we have the course ID, which is coming from our parameter, the chapter ID, which is coming from our parameter, the timestamp, which is coming from here, and the note, which is coming from our Wized variable. And the chapter name is coming from our chapter detail variable that we've already covered. So that's how we are adding that note. Now, back to my previous point. So if the user tries to send a empty note, we basically alert them that, hey, you can't do that. As I've already previously mentioned, that we have a hidden error state. So we reveal that error state. So I've already erased this, and as you can see, that has been reflected on my variable. If I try to send this, you can't create an empty note. So again, we also do the same thing over here as well. So if you try to erase that, and as you can see, I've erased that. And this editor here is related to this variable, edit note. So whenever you click on save note here, and we're executing the edit note request. So whenever I open this up, you'll notice that the URL parameters, we have note ID, which is coming from our note ID, and we have this note here. Wait, actually, note. Oh, okay, note ID and our edit note. So we also have another variable which I completely forgot to point out. So we have edit note and note ID. So this note that you're interacting with also has its own ID. So whenever we're editing this note over and we send that to Xano, we want to let Xano know that, hey, this is a specific note that I want the edit being applied to. So we have two variables here. Again, edit note and note ID. So that's what we are trying to do here. So make sure to include those in your URL parameters. They're programmed into the right variables. And that's how we accomplish this action right here. Now let's hop over onto Notion and see what else it does. Conditional UI feedback, we've already done that. Note editing enhancements, implement. Okay, so another thing is that okay, so we've already covered all these. These are good. The last bit is the sanitization for security. So basically, it's utilizing DOM Purify, which makes sure that if anyone is typing something malicious, like that could pretty much attack your application, to stop that from happening, we have a third-party application called DOM Purify. Sorry, library called DOM Purify. So that's something that's also being covered in this code right here. So hopefully that makes sense. And that being said, that brings us to the end for action number 26. Now, with action number 27, set visibility to create note loader. These are all the loaders that we have here. So I'm just going to skip that ahead. And then we have load notes and render notes. So load note is specifically for loading up all our notes on page load. But specifically in this case, it's request finishes. When get chapter details is finished, we get all our notes. So let's do that. If I reload this page, so we're grabbing all our chapter details and we're making sure that we get all the notes that is related to this course. Also, another thing, when the chapters, not the chapters, but the notes that you're saving is saved to that course, not chapters. So no matter what chapter you go to, you're still going to see the note that is related to that specific course. If you're going to any other courses, you're not going to see those notes. you'll only see these notes relevant to their respective courses. All right, and then we have 29, which is rendering all the notes. This is very easy to understand. I'm going to skip this. Then we have 30, set note timestamp. So that's the timestamp over there. We're setting that. Set chapter name, skip that. Set note chapter rich text. We're going to skip that as well. But before I skip that, you'll notice that the text type is set to HTML because Xano is returning a custom HTML text. So that's why we're selecting HTML here. And then we have reload notes. So this is in the event when someone is adding a new note. When the request finishes, we reload our notes by executing this request right here called the get notes. All right, set delete note ID and delete note. Okay, so we are setting our delete note ID and delete note. So as I mentioned before, we have two separate variables, delete note ID and delete note. Whenever you find yourself deleting this, we grab the ID of this note, we drop it in here, and then we execute our request, which is remove note, which only has the URL parameter of note ID. So let's see that in action. First, it's going to fill it up here, and then we're going to execute that request. There we go. So once that note has been removed, we reload our notes again. And obviously, we only had one note to begin with, so that's why we don't see anything else. So that's what this action does. All right, so let's move on to our next action here. Set note ID to variable. Okay, so what this action does is, to actually show this better, I'm going to create another note. This is a test, create note. All right, so whenever you find yourself having to click on the edit button here, we grab the ID of that note and we basically store that in the note ID here. There we go. The reason why we do that is because once you click on save note, and so that we have the note ID handy with us so that we can use that when we're making our call over to Xano. All right, so next on the list we have is the action number 36, prevent default action. So this is quite basic. So again, we have a custom code here, which is related to our Quill JS editor. And this basically ensures that whenever you're clicking on the save note or submit note, it ensures that it's properly displaying the your error state. So that's essentially what this code does. And it also, obviously, you can see that it's also interacting with the Wized request of edit note. So let's have a look here. Execute the edit note. All right, I'm just trying to jog my memory up here because I'm trying to remind myself what we have here. Okay, yeah, so that's what we got here. All right, let me jump over onto Wiz so I can explain this better. So this custom code basically covers these scenarios where our error banner is actually displayed properly. So let's say that it covers scenarios like this. You have written something, and when you create a note, obviously it's going to create that note for you. But let's say you create a note and then you decided to erase that off, and you've gotten the error state banner popping up. Then what we want to do is, if you type something again, this is a test 2, it removes the error banner completely. So that's what we're doing with this code here. The same also goes here. But if you type something here, it doesn't go away. But if you click on save note, yeah, it works fine. I think it only targets the parent editor. So yeah, that's what our action does, prevent default action. All right, then let's take a look at 37 here, reload notes after note edit. Okay, so once we've edited the note, we reload our get notes request. The same for note delete, so we're going to skip that. Set visibility to save note loader. So it's this loader inside this button. I'm going to skip that as well. And lastly, the last action, which is our Disqus commenting right here feature. We just needed to apply a bit of modification to our Disqus custom code. So if I hop over onto Notion document here, you'll notice that this is the code that we have. And basically what we're doing is that we're letting the code know that we each and every page is unique based on the ID and the chapter parameter that it has. So that itself counts as a unique page. And then based off of that, that's how Disqus does its logic. And whenever you click on those courses, you'll find the comments on each and every page, respectively. Over here, I haven't done any other modification other than that. This is just pretty basic. The code right here. So I'm just gonna skip over that. Hopefully this makes sense. And if it doesn't, just leave a comment on the comment section and I'll make sure to answer that. But yeah, that brings us to the end of episode number 8. We're almost close to the end of this series. I hope that you're enjoying this and hope that this complex project is making sense to you guys. That being said, I will see you on the next one and thank you for watching.